If a policy is to be changed, what should the government do? The government seems to be famous for stepping outside of procedure and enacting laws. Some of the policies that the government makes, some of the decisions the government takes, is it really for the benefit of the people, or is it really for the benefit of the members, the ministers of this government? We have an in-depth analysis today about what the government is trying to do when it comes to enacting new laws. In particular, the Foreign Exchange Act. What is happening? We have Ramesh Irugal Bandara and Farah Shaukatari joining us from the studios. Ramesh, over to you.
Well, thank you, Chaturanga. First of all, we are going to focus on this extraordinary gazette issued on the 17th of November by Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe in his capacity as the Minister of National Policies and Economic Affairs. Now, this gazette is pertaining to Act number 12 of 2017, the new exchange control regulations, the new Foreign Exchange Act. Now, all this time what was in place, the law that was in place in the country was the Foreign Exchange Act of 1953. Now, imagine what will happen if you open up the markets completely and allow foreign exchange to freely enter and leave the country. Surely, this will have a devastating impact on the country's economy. Now, under the previous legislation, anyone caught doing something wrong in anything related to foreign exchange, there could be criminal charges brought against these individuals through the previous legislation. However, as the new legislation comes in, legal experts, lawyers and other pundits point out that these criminal charges that could be brought against these offences have been removed. Now, this act entered into law on the 28th of July, and through this, a majority of the powers are vested in the hands of the subject minister who controls the central bank. Now, usually when you think the minister who controls the central bank is the Minister of Finance. However, this government actually changed this trend. The central bank actually comes under the Prime Minister in his capacity as the Minister of National Policies and Economic Affairs. The Minister of Finance is there separately, and the state banks and other commercial banks are being handled by a completely different minister. Now, the current legislations gives sweeping powers to the subject minister who controls the central bank, and in this case it is this gentleman over here, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe. So this is the backdrop for our story. I'm going to go over to Faraz Shaukatari, our investigative journalist. Faraz, what is your take on this new legislation?
Thank you, Ramesh. The problem, there is a problem, and the problem is that there is an accumulation of power to just one person, the minister in charge of the subject of the central bank. It could be any minister, as long as the central bank comes under that person, then that person accumulates a lot of power. And you have to remember that in the past, the people of Sri Lanka obviously were fed up with this vast accumulation of power to one person, and we found that in the result of the presidential election in 2015. And so that remains, Ramesh, the problem. It is a question of an accumulation of power in which the line minister in charge of the central bank is able to overrule and direct the Monetary Board of Sri Lanka, who in effect run the central bank for the people of this country. So that is the main problem. It is an accumulation of power.
Now, Faraz, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. We are going to listen to the views that were expressed by President's Counsel Hemantha Warnakulusurya when he attended the Satana political debate program aired on Sirasa TV last night. Let's listen to what President's Counsel Warnakulusurya has to say, and let's return to the debate.
මෙම නඩු වාර්තාව මහාධිකරණයේ නඩුවක්. මෙහි විත්තිකරුවන් තිදෙනෙක් සිටිනවා.
This case is one that was taken up at the High Court. There are three parties named as suspects. One is Nexia Corporate Consultants Private Limited, the other is Lincoln Piasena, and the third is Ravi Karunanayaka. This case was filed for bringing in funds in violation of Article 7.1 of the Exchange Control Act of Sri Lanka. When the justice retires, she delivers a ruling. There was a point raised in a discrepancy in the date that was mentioned. So she said, because of that error, the indictment cannot be taken ahead. There was a very lengthy verdict. In the end of that verdict it says, accordingly, as the case cannot be taken forward based on the charges mentioned in the indictment and as there is no result, taking legality into consideration, I decide to release the defendants. This is to release. If they are to be acquitted, the examination of evidence from the prosecution needs to be concluded, and if the judicial process has not been followed until that moment, the Attorney General will be given the legal right to file charges again. This verdict on the release is in effect for 20 years. Therefore, this will not be termed as a criminal case after 20 years. The charges can be filed again even by the next government. But what does the government of good governance do? They introduce something called the Foreign Exchange Act. This is the Foreign Exchange Act number 12 of 2017. What does the act say? It says the Exchange Control Act is hereby repealed. At present, there is no case before court and a case cannot be filed. What will be the result? A person has made an application with the Supreme Court. The Gazette was issued on the 17th of November, not allowing the Attorney General to file such cases. Who introduced this act? It was Ravi Karunanayake. One introduces an act to conceal one's theft and thereafter acquits oneself.
අපේ රවි කරුණානායක ඇමතුමා තමන්ගේ පනතකින් තමන්ගේ හොරකම වහගෙන තමන්ගේ වරද වහගෙන තමන් නිදොස් කරනවා.
Now the case that the President's Counsel was referring to was one which was brought against former Minister of Finance Ravi Karunanayake. As we see here, this act was actually initially brought forward by former Minister Ravi Karunanayake as well. So the timing, as President's Counsel Hemantha Warankulasuri says, the timing of this act, of this legislation is very peculiar. There is one article in this new legislation that caught my eye especially, that is article number 11 of this new legislation, which puts a time limit on investigating certain crimes. We are once again going to go to Faraz Shaukat Ali. Faraz, what is the meaning of these time limits that have been put in place to investigate certain crimes?
Well, what it means, Ramesh, is that now that the old Exchange Control Act has been repealed, they have imposed a time limit of 6 months, in which that is the time for any pending cases to be concluded, and it will be concluded under the old act, the Exchange Control Act, which has just been repealed and replaced by the new Foreign Exchange Act. And so we have to bear in mind that this time limit of 6 months is pretty short. We have to also bear in mind that in our country, the law's delays means that there's every year on average around 900,000 cases are carried forward into the next court year, and that's the average. It fluctuates slightly up and down, but this time limit of 6 months is simply not on. It's too short, and it means that many things will just get swept under the carpet, and that is our great concern, Ramesh.
Faraz, well, thank you very much for that explanation. Now, these issues, these new legislations come through cabinet. We have public representatives who are, we believe, are somewhat knowledgeable in these areas. There might be some in the cabinet as well. The issue is, aren't these matters discussed in cabinet? Aren't these restrictions discussed or debated in cabinet? Now, make no mistake, we have no issues, we have no qualms or no issues with loosening up restrictions so that we allow our brothers and sisters working in other lands to send in their money freely to the country. The issue that we have is the timing of this legislation and whether this legislation is being brought in to cover up the issues or the crimes of friends of this government. All we can say is that we call on the President to focus his attention on this issue as well, so that we can finally move on from this.